Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey all, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today's episode is a coaching episode with Hayley and James. We covered a few things in this podcast. One thing was when they're out in public, Hayley found that sometimes they acted in ways that made her feel really embarrassed, and she wanted to know why they were acting that way and what she could do about it. And also we talked about some differences that Hayley and James were finding in terms of their approach with the kids, and we helped them to get on the same page quite a little bit more and just over some of the peaceful parenting philosophies. Then we checked back in a month later and saw how everything went. I think that no matter what ages your kids are, you'll find this to be an interesting conversation in terms of peaceful parenting and looking at how they're navigating this together and things that we all find when we're out in public. And sometimes we cringe a little bit when our kids do or say something that may be just a little bit embarrassing. So have a listen. And if you think you would like to get some coaching and come on the podcast, be sure to reach out to me. You can email me, sarah@sarah.rosensweet.com, or you can send me a message on Facebook or Instagram, and I can tell you more about what's involved in coming on the podcast. I also have a favor to ask you. If you could rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star rating on Spotify or I guess, depending on which one you listen to, it really helps us to reach more listeners. And if we reach more listeners, we can reach more families and help spread the word about peaceful parenting. It would also be amazing if you like the podcast and you have a friend who you think might like the podcast, screenshot it and send it to them. There's so many podcasts out there today. Sometimes we get lost in the shuffle, and if you could help us get found, that would be amazing. All right, let's meet Hayley and James. Hello, Hayley. Hello, James. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Hello. Hi, Sarah.
Nice to see you. So tell us just a little bit about yourself and your family.
So we have 2 beautiful children. Our little boy Stanley is 3 and our daughter Margot is 2. So their age gap, we always debate this, but we think it's about 17 months.
15.
Yeah, it's not much. So they're a little bit like twins, but twins that don't really get along very well. Yeah, more often than not, they're not really friends, which brings us to you to see if you can help with that.
Okay, cool. So tell me, so just for full disclosure, you and I have talked once when you did a free short consult about coaching. And so I know from talking to you before that Stanley is fairly strong-willed and intense. So why don't you just start by telling us some of the things that you're struggling with? I always like to work with examples. And also you did say in preparation for this podcast that you've been following peaceful parenting and that you already pretty familiar with it. So that's just good to know.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I guess one of the biggest things for me, and this is causing me, again, full disclosure, and I'll be open with you, it's causing me quite a lot of embarrassment, is when I take the kids out. I'm with them a lot on my own. I like doing things with them just as a trio. But when I take Stanley and Margot out, if we're in a setting, Sarah, where there's other children and there are toys, Stanley and Margot seem to go into a world where they're doing imaginative play, which is really nice. But if another child comes over, even within a meter, they shout. They're so rude. And they push the other child, and this is mine, go away. And I feel they back each other up on it a little bit as well. So one will say that, and then the other comes over to back that up. which is really strange because when they're in the house, they are enemies, arch rival enemies. But when they're out in that environment I've just described to you, there's a lot of togetherness. And I find it really embarrassing, and I don't know how to challenge their behavior around that because I don't think where.
Okay, so we can talk about that. I just want to say, it sounds like, so sibling rivalry, when you say when they're together at home, they're arch rivals. Sibling rivalry is always about the resources of, the parents, right? Like who do mom and dad love more? Who are they going to choose? Like, will there be enough for me? Like, it's not that they don't necessarily love each other or want to play together, but it sounds like they're sort of feeling like they're in competition for your affection and your attention, right? Like that's what sibling, it's not necessarily about them and their relationship. It's about their jockeying for position with you two as their parents. So it makes sense to me that when they're out in the world, that's not really what's going on anymore. It's more like the two of them against the rest of the world, right? So I'm not surprised that happens. I think that's probably pretty typical. And because that rivalry isn't about whether or not they like each other, it's about getting the more attention and affection from you and getting you to be on their side. So when you're out at the playground, that's out the window because it's like the two of them against the world. The other thing that I want to say is 2 and 3-year-olds have zero impulse control. Like their brains haven't even developed to the point where, let me back that up a little bit. When they're upset or excited, they have zero impulse control. So there's part of the brain that's called the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking brain. And then part of the brain called the amygdala, which is the part of our brain that is where our impulses and big feelings come from, that's always on the lookout for danger or safety, right? So danger could be, these kids are going to wreck our play. Like these kids are going to come out, like we have this great game going, and these kids are coming over here and they're going to wreck our play. You also see the amygdala come out in moments of excitement when you're just about to get ice cream or it's a birthday party or something like that, right? Where that self-control, that impulse control goes out the window. And the reason for this is because little kids can only be in one part of their brain or the other. So Dan Siegel, who's a parenting person, he has what's called the hand model of the brain. You can see me, but for our listeners, the hand model, right now I've got my fingers closed over my thumb. And the thumb in Dan Siegel's model, the thumb is the amygdala and the limbic system. And the fingers are like the thinking brain. And so when a kid is calm or when a person is calm, I've got this like fist shape happening. The amygdala is like hidden away and covered up by the thinking brain or the prefrontal cortex. When a kid gets upset, Dan Siegel talks about them flipping their lid. So I've just opened up my hand, and the part of the brain that's active when a kid gets upset or excited is that amygdala. And when Dan Siegel talks about the amygdala as the downstairs brain and the thinking brain is the upstairs brain. And so when kids' brains are developing, and this typically happens between the ages of 5 and 7 for a more typical child, or a bit later for a more sensitive child or a neurodivergent child, between the ages of, let's say, 5 to 9, to cover all those bases, there's a staircase that develops between the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain. And that connection between the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain is what makes impulse control possible. So if somebody, cuts you off in traffic and you resist screaming your head off at them because you don't want to scare your kids who are in the back seat, that's your amygdala wants to scream your head off at the person who's cut you off in traffic, because the amygdala is what launches that fight, flight, or freeze. So the amygdala wants to fight, right? Scream your head off. But your thinking brain is going, no, don't scream your head off because it's going to scare the kids in the back seat. And so your thinking brain stays active while your amygdala has gotten mildly activated, right? So that's that. Both of those parts of your brain can stay online at the same time. With a small child, someone who hasn't developed that staircase yet, they can only be in one part of their brain or the other. So when they flip their lid, their thinking brain is totally gone offline, and they're just purely operating from their amygdala. Now, this is a brain hardware development question. It's not that some kids, have better brain development than other kids, but there are some kids who are less spirited or sensitive, who don't have the big feelings, who don't look like they have, who who look like they have better impulse control, but it's really just that they don't have the impulses. I just talked a lot, so hopefully that makes sense. So basically what I'm saying is when you see Stanley and Margot, like, getting upset because someone's going to interrupt their play at the playground, they're doing their absolute best they can in that moment. It's just they don't have the brain hardware yet, those brain connections yet, to support any impulse control. So if you talk to them about playing nicely, not shouting at other people, all of those suggestions are living in their upstairs brain, right? In their prefrontal cortex. When they get upset or excited, all of that upstairs brain stuff is just gone, right?
Yeah.
So does that all make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And I can tell they're not actually angry. Like if I go over to them and sort of say, hey guys, go down to their level and try and talk to them. And I'll try and make friends with the little girl or boy so that I'm modeling how they should talk to that child. And they have a conversation with me that's lovely. They don't say, oh, mommy, this person's trying to do this. Or they're really happy to welcome me in. It's just their initial response is so...
It's the fear, right? It's fear. It's fear. They're going to wreck my game. They're going to wreck our game, right?
Yeah.
So this might not necessarily be anger. Anger is a secondary emotion. So the first emotion might be fear. They're going to wreck our game. And then if they actually come in and wreck the game, then maybe you might get anger, right? But the fear is we've got this really nice thing going here, and these other kids are going to come up and wreck it. So I love that you are helping them, because that was going to be my suggestion, is because they're too little to be able to completely control themselves and modulate their responses at the playground. It's up to us to be that impulse control. So just like you'll hold hands while you're crossing the street because you can't trust that they're actually going to stay walking next to you and they might dodge into traffic, or, you only let them play where if there's a busy road, you only let them play if there's a fence there, right? Because we have to be that impulse control for them when there's situations happening, because they're so little.
And do you think, because I'm not shouting at them, I'm not getting angry with them, because I feel embarrassed, but I don't feel angry at them. But all I'm doing is I'm trying to say to them both, we're in a space where boys and girls can play with all these toys. Why don't we see what this little girl's name is? And I'm trying to kind of, welcome that person in a little bit. Is that the right thing to do?
How do they seem to respond to that?
Well, it's hit and miss, really. So a lot of the time, I think the child feels that threatened. If I'm honest, Sarah, they just dart off and they go and find something else to play with. But if they do kind of want to get involved, Stanley's probably the one that finds that harder to accept. Whereas Margot, this sounds awful. I don't mean I manipulate my children, but I can manipulate her where I say, this girl seems really nice. Maybe she wants to be your friend. Maybe she just wants to stroke your horsey. And Margot go, okay, come and stroke my horsey. And she's a little bit more open, whereas probably will hold his ground quite hard on the fact, Mummy, I don't want this person to play.
Yeah.
Mummy, they can go play on that bike. There's a bike there. Go, and he'll go and get the bike. And he's like, here, you play on bike.
Well, that's kind of them. Yeah.
Well, it didn't seem very different there. I know what you're saying.
The reason why I asked is because I'm of two minds. Like I think there's nothing wrong with protecting their play. If they have a nice thing going and they don't necessarily want anyone else to play with them, I think that what I would do is run interference. Like if they're playing nicely together and you are nearby and you see another child approaching, you might say something like, hey, Stanley and Margot, I see this other child coming up. Do you want to see if they want to play with you? Because I think it's okay if they just want to play together without anybody else. But you need to coach them of how to say, no, thank you. We're playing by ourselves right now, or something. I think you could just do coaching with them of how you can say, we don't want to play with you in a nice way.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
I'm just thinking the steps that lead to that point. Is there any value? Because as Hayley says, I'm generally at work when Hayley's taking the kids somewhere. But is there any value in sort of saying to them when you arrive somewhere, sort of having a little look around them and who should we go and make friends with today? Just trying to encourage them to go and be the initiator of contact rather than being on the receiving end of it. Is there any value in that to get them to learn to interact with them differently?
I don't see any harm in it. I don't know if so at this age, kids are at 2 and 3, they're still at the age where their peers are not the most important thing to them. They mostly do what's called parallel play at this age, where they just play next to other kids. I see like the brother and sister, not surprised they play together, but mostly other kids are not. There are exceptions to that. There are some kids who are very social, who even at this age want to play with other kids. I guess my point is it's not crucial at this point. Like you're not like, okay, we really have to encourage them to play with their peers and make friends because they're still so little. Like that's developmentally, that's not really important until, well, in North America, kindergarten, I don't know what you call it in England, but around 4 or 5 is where it becomes.
Turns 4 in September, so it may be he's transitioning into that.
Yeah, maybe, but you can also, it's also okay to follow his lead. Like if he's happy playing with his sister, we don't need to force that social development. I mean, I would say if he's 7 or 8 and has some social anxiety and doesn't want to play with anybody else, yes, you want to like give the kid tools. And there is a point where maybe kids need more support around social interactions, but I wouldn't say at 2 and 3 that's crucial. As I said, there's no harm in it. There's no harm in saying like, do you want to make friends with these kids at the playground? But there's also no harm in just letting them play together if that's what they want to do.
Okay. And one of the things, Sarah, so I need to know whether you think that this is us that's creating this with Stanley and Margot, but they talk to people in a really, really bad tone. So like each other, they talk to, and they do other people. So I'm always encouraging them to use their talking voices. So when they have that scenario where they shout at the child, I was like, okay, maybe we could use a talking voice. You can say the same thing, Stanley, just in a nice talking voice. But we was on the train the other day and the girl in the front of the carriage said, oh, I think the train's stopping. She said it to her mum, but I came sat to it. And Stanley just leaned over and went, the train isn't stopping. The train is still moving. He was, well, mate, like, he's not even being spoken to. Yeah, and we need to have this really harsh tone with other boys and girls, with us and with each other. And I try and use my talking voice. I try not to shout at them.
Yeah.
I try and communicate in the way I expect to be communicated back with. But and my friends' kids don't seem to have that tone. So
okay, so I think that, there are some kids who just don't care if somebody else is saying the wrong thing, if this train is stopping or not stopping, right? I'm going back to what I said before about, there are some kids who look like they have good impulse control because they just don't have the impulses or the big feelings. And there are some kids who would never say that to a stranger because they don't actually care if the stranger is saying the wrong thing and the train's stopping. But Stanley sounds like a person who precision is very important to him, and having the facts right is very important to him, right? He has that feeling, and that hasn't yet been modulated by caring what other people think and trying to be polite about it. Like as someone gets older, they might still have that feeling of, that person saying the wrong thing, but I know enough about social graces and what other people will think that I'm not going to say the first thing that comes into my head.
Okay.
If that makes sense. And he doesn't have, as I said, coming back to impulse control, he doesn't have the impulse control yet, combined with knowing what the right thing to do is. So I love that you're coaching him. Like this is all going to be about coaching. Stanley, everybody can have their own idea about things. It's okay, right? You can say something like that.
Yeah.
So just a very gentle modeling and correcting. And I think for you, it's going to be really important to give yourself a huge dose of self-compassion, because you're right, it is embarrassing to, have a kid who's like yelling at other kids at the playground or correcting a stranger on the train. And at the same time, your loyalty is to Stanley, right? And Margot. Like your loyalty is like what Stanley thinks of is more important than what the other people on the train think. So, conventional parenting flips that and is like, what other people think is more important than what my kid thinks. So I've got to be really hard on them and, quote, discipline them so no one will think I'm a bad parent. Yeah. But really we want to think about like, well, how can we look at this from Stanley's perspective? That he's just a little kid, doesn't have much impulse control yet. Facts are really important to him, and being precise is really important to him. And we can help him learn and develop some more sort of social graces. I love how you say, like, you can say that in a different way. Like, I love that.
Okay. Because I do feel that's one of my other challenges as well. I think because I'm on my own with them quite a lot, I feel quite a lot of pressure to do conventional parenting I really do, because I feel judged. I feel judged by that little girl's parent, that I should say to my son that, keep your nose out. I feel like I should say.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that to him, because I recognise that he didn't do that purposefully. He's doing his best.
Yeah.
I do feel really judged, and I don't know how I control almost my impulses sometimes to handle that situation in the way that you've just articulated it.
Self-compassion is the answer, really.
Okay.
Like when that happens, just give yourself oh, this is really hard. It is hard, right? It is hard to feel that other people are judging you. And just say, so I have a phrase that I like to use, even though these parents are judging me, or they might be judging me, because you don't know, they might not be. But even though these parents are judging me, I'm still a good mom, or I'm still
worthy.
Yeah, I'm still, exactly, you know it. I'm still lovable and worthy. That is exactly it. So both those things can be true at once. Those that people can be judging you, and you are still lovable and worthy. Like your lovability and worth does not depend on whether or not Stanley, isn't minding his own business on the train.
Okay, I'm glad that's normal as well, because he does do that and you are right, Stanley. If he sees somebody and they look different, he has to comment, Sarah. It's just, he always does it. And I can sometimes, if I see someone, I was going to do it, I know he's going to say it. And he sometimes goes over to them, and he doesn't, he'll say, somebody's really large, he'll tell. And I come away from that, and I don't really know how to, I have tried to explain to him that, sometimes maybe say things to mummy, just to mummy. We're around lots and lots of people, and we can have our chat about it. So he doesn't go over and say it to other people. But
so what I think it's good to have a blanket thing where you say we don't comment on other people's appearances.
Okay.
Just as, we don't comment on other people's appearances is just like a blanket rule. However, you can't also stop him from commenting on someone's appearances. So I think when he does, what I have read a lot lately is that people who do have differences, whether they're in a wheelchair or have some sort of difference in their appearance, or whether they're in a bigger body, they would much prefer, and I'm sure not everybody's the same, but what I've been reading a lot is that people would much prefer their parent, the parent of that child, to say, yes, that person is in a larger body, and we also don't make comments on someone's appearance or on people's bodies, but not to say oh, don't say that, because you're inadvertently teaching your child that there's something wrong with that person.
Yeah.
If you're telling them not to comment, right? So I think most people, and I have also heard parents of handicapped children or children with different differences, that they welcome a conversation about, yes, my child is wearing leg braces because blah, blah, blah. And that it's much better to just be open and honest and encourage your child to, maybe you don't need to encourage Stanley to ask questions, but instead of saying, shh, don't talk about that, because that teaches that it's shameful.
So I'll just encourage him away. If I can see, I'll just try and distract him so he doesn't see. But that's not always possible. So your advice is really, really good about that we don't comment on other people's appearances. Because I do, I must admit, we're very friendly and he's very friendly. So I will always, he saw a disabled little boy at the park last night and he said, oh, Mummy, that boy looks different. He talks different. And I said, but he talks. Why don't you go over and ask him what his name is? And I did say, you remember me telling you that boys and girls are sometimes different?
Perfect.
And he did go over and he did say hello, and the little boy said his name, and that was all great. So he doesn't have an issue with it. He's quite open.
Yeah, but and if we are sort of shameful and shh, don't say that, that will teach him to have an issue with it.
Yeah. And I don't want that. Yeah. I want him to be open and invite lots of different types of people into his life.
Exactly.
So, okay, let's go. But we can definitely say that, so we don't comment on other people's appearances.
Yeah, and I think that's just a good, a good rule to follow. But as I said, can't stop him from commenting on other people's appearances. So if he does, I think being just open and friendly, and not trying to shush him. And of course, you're going to go by the other person's reaction and what they're comfortable with. But I've at least read a lot of parents who have disabled kids really invite that conversation, and that they see that as inclusive to have those.
I've noticed that. I've never met anyone that's been put off by Stanley's reaction, what he said. We've always ended up striking a conversation, it being really friendly.
Yeah.
Just one situation that happened recently that has really knocked my confidence a little bit. But I think now you've given me that to work on, I'll try and get back on track. And
Good.
him to keep more.
Good. And I think just when he does say, if he does say things, I love just going back to the park situation. I think it's okay to coach them, that they can tell the other people in a nice way that they don't want to, that they're, we're playing our own game right now. And maybe we can play with you later or something like that. Because think about it, if you're having, if you two are on a date night and you are at a restaurant and, you're not necessarily going to want every single person who comes into the restaurant to come and join you at your table.
No.
Right? It's okay to.
Yeah, no, I totally understand.
Yeah. And there's some times where you want to be more inclusive and sometimes when you don't, but you can always be kind about it.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think it is just their we've got a good thing going. We don't want anyone to wreck it. That is what makes them, come out with the yelling at first or the rude talking or whatever.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, because that's helped me look at the situation differently, because I think I brace myself and that then puts me in a bit of a negative headspace because I feel like I'm almost going to war. Like, I've got to make sure that we come out of this with as few tears as possible. And those tears aren't often with my children. They're other people's, sadly.
Well, so, you can run interference too. Like if you see them playing and you see other kids coming to the park, you can go over to Margot and Stanley and say, "Oh, I see some other children have just arrived. Would you like to play with them?" And then you can just model, if they come over, you can just say "Oh, hello, little boy or little girl. This is Margot and Stanley. They're just playing on their own right now. They might want to play with you later or something." You can just
really
model
nice.
that.
Yeah, that's really nice, actually. Yeah.
And you still might get people. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say you still might get people who think that you're being rude or, that you should be encouraging your kids to play with everyone. And remember, who is your loyalty to?
Yeah, my kids.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything else that you wanted to? What about the things that? Because I do really enjoy your podcast. I really enjoy all of the conversations you have with different experts. And there's some scenarios that we face where you say, Sarah's going to want an example of this, and I haven't got one pre-wired into my brain, but where you say to me that you think sometimes I'm not firm enough around my boundaries, and you feel that I don't necessarily, you don't challenge me around the choices I give them. I do try and get them involved in doing their breakfast and choices and what they want to wear for the day and stuff like that. But you do sometimes say that I'm a bit woolly on the boundaries front.
And I'm actually trying to think of an example where that would be true, but
because I think if I'm right, Sarah, in terms of your peaceful parenting approach, I listened to a podcast earlier and it was one of the ones where the child doesn't want to get in the bath, it's bedtime, and you want the routine to run to plan, so you skip the bath that night, and they're not winning. You're just trying to prevent an argument, prevent a fight, and move through the schedule to get them into bed on time. Yeah. Sometimes you feel like I'm conceiving ground a little bit on that, and Stanley's getting his own way.
I think I see what you're saying. And I think that it partly has to do with the conventional parenting, the impact that being surrounded by conventional parenting and being raised by that is that the parent is always supposed to have the upper hand, and that the child is always supposed to listen to the parent. And I think sometimes if we're challenging that in our, in the way that we run our family, it can feel a little bit uncomfortable where you're like, oh, I'm listening to the child instead of doing what I think, I wanted him to have a bath. And of course, if he's covered with dirt and sunscreen, you'd work a little bit harder at trying to get the bath to happen, or at least, a wipe down or a shower, or, we don't want to put super dirty kids to bed if we can help it. But if there's really no, there's really no problem with skipping the bath, then skip the bath. But I think what you're maybe feeling is that aren't they supposed to just do what I tell them to do?
Yeah. And And the other day, so Saturday, and you didn't actually go into this afterwards. I feel like I'm just pulling James up now. Look. But on Saturday morning, Stanley, I feel really bad because it always starts with Stanley. Stanley was having a bit of a meltdown and James yelled at him. And then after he yelled at him, Stanley wanted a cuddle. And James was like, I feel like he's come to me because I yelled at him.
And he wants to connect with me.
And I don't believe that in my core. I don't believe that yelling was a connecting feature.
No, I think, so if I can explain my interpretation, and I think your interpretation is different to mine. Your interpretation is that because I've yelled at him, that's progress. That I believe that by disciplining him in that way, that he's reacted that way. That's not what I meant. I didn't feel good about it, but I'd been pushed that far that I had nowhere to go. And I didn't stop, drop and breathe. I didn't. And so I felt that after I'd yelled at him, he then wanted a cuddle because he wanted to connect with me. And in some way in his brain, I don't know how to articulate it correctly, but in his brain, he's like, Daddy's rejecting me in some way, so I want to connect with Daddy. And I'm not saying it's right, by the way. I don't feel good about the fact that I shouted at Stanley and so therefore he respected me. It's not about that. Because I am very on board with the peaceful parenting approach. There are certain things that I've questioned, but then when I've taken the time to understand them, I'm like, that does make sense. It just requires more effort. And that's what I needed to understand. But I'm very much a why person. So that's where Stanley gets it from. I need to understand why before you're going to get me to do anything. I can't understand the why. I can't connect to the thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so what I was trying to explain is he's come to me because he probably feels I've rejected him in some way. And I don't feel good about it. So it's not that I want to then start doing that. It's just that that's why. And we've had a great bond since. But we've been good because I've been
he wanted to repair, right?
Yeah.
He wanted to fix things with you. He felt disconnected when you yelled at him and he wanted to fix things with you. I think it sounds like what Hayley maybe was thinking in the different interpretation than you, that something worked about yelling.
Yeah. And it wasn't, for me, it wasn't about it working. It was about Stanley's reaction to it. Not being right, but his reaction to it was to fix.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is that, I mean, and I know this isn't what you're saying, but yelling often does, quote, work because it scares kids and they're afraid of losing their connection with us, right? But we don't, operating through fear is not healthy for anybody physiologically or emotionally. And also it tends to build up over time because kids will start to harden their hearts. Like say you're yelling at a 3-year-old and they're cooperating because they're scared and they don't want you to be upset with them, but they're going to build up defenses because that yelling is painful. And then you have to more and more yell as they get older to get through those defenses. And so it usually tends to build over time, but it does, quote, work often to get kids to do what we want them to do. It's just, what are you losing in the process, right? The damaging of it.
That's the thing I've come to learn and respect with the peaceful parenting approach and what you've shared with me is that short-term pain will equal long-term gain, whereas short-term gain will equal long-term pain.
I love that. Oh my gosh.
And so I'm very on board with that now. Because initially, I totally got some of the concepts. It was just some of it was a bit, okay, I need to understand that before I can subscribe to it. One question I have got, and I appreciate we're kind of 35 minutes in, so I'll keep it as short as I can. From how we engage with the kids, how am I trying to explain this? Is there, and I suppose coming back to what you were trying to say, can we overserve them?
Mm-hmm.
Can we give them too much attention? Can we then create potential? And I know you're smiling because I'm aiming this up a little bit at Hayley, but sometimes, primarily, I don't give in quite as quickly to the demands, and I do ask to be asked nicely. Can we ask in our nice voices, and can we say please and thank you? And can we have a little bit of that foundation to having balance, I guess. Whereas I think you are quite quick to get involved and be with them all the time. So what am I trying to ask here? Is there any downside to not being at the center of their world all the time?
Well, I think what you just described is a little bit, I mean, not to be just totally gendered, but that's often like a mom and dad difference, like that I see a lot. And I saw that in my own relationship too. Like my husband would be like, "You're coddling them," right? And now I can say that, yes, I probably did coddle my children, and I don't. That word often has a very negative connotation, and to me, I felt like I was just nurturing them. Like that's what it felt like to me. I was nurturing them, and I think our experiment is almost over because my youngest is 17, and they're like amazing, independent, happy, hardworking, thoughtful, kind humans. And there's this guy named Gabor Mate. He's a physician. He's in Vancouver, and I saw this clip of a talk that he was on a podcast or something, and somebody asked him about coddling children. And I think the guy even was talking about men, like, aren't we just creating mama's boys by this coddling? And we'll put this in the show notes and I'll send it to you after so you can find it. But he said there was a really long-term study looking at mothers and nurturing. And he said that the children that were coddled / nurtured the most were the ones that ended up the best, the most successful, and the best developed and healthiest of the adults in the study. I'm not doing justice to his quote, but I don't believe that you can nurture a child too much or coddle them too much. The trouble comes when we don't let them be independent, when they want to be independent. That's trouble. Like if you have a child who's like, I want to do this, you're like, no, let me do that for you. But if you have a child who's asking for help and is looking for nurturing, I don't think you can do too much. And also the trouble comes in when we're going against our own sense of what's right. Like, if we're giving in to something that we know is really a bad idea, or that goes against our values, or that is, against the health and safety of the child. Like, I was just thinking of like, the child is crying that they don't want to wear their helmet. So we're like, okay, you can, ride your scooter without your helmet. I would say that would be being too flexible and going, not following the limits that need to be set. In terms of your question of, is it okay to say, can you ask for that in a nicer way? Sure. I mean, I think that sounds like coaching, right? That sounds like coaching. And it's totally different than like, I'll give it to you when you say please, or, withholding until they say the magic word. I would just go for modeling.
Yeah.
I would say like, of course I'll get you some milk. Can you just say, Papa, can I please have some milk? And you're getting them the milk while you're saying that.
Yeah.
That was kind of long-winded, but
what I've taken from you and actually I think what you've inadvertently done by sharing that feedback there, I think has probably met me and Hayley in the middle in terms of, when they're playing, the doing it for them, encouraging them to do it themselves, showing them how, etc. Is probably, you've explained it actually really well for me to then articulate where I sit on it. And I think that's where we meet in the middle on it. I'm less inclined to, if Stanley immediately gives up on something, I'm less inclined to do it for him. I will try and help him to do it. And so that's what I guess the question I was asking is where's the line there? And I think you've answered it, that there's a middle.
And I love that. And also I think you got to look at a kid's distress level. Like if a child's like really distressed and they can't do something, like they're trying to zip their zipper and they're really distressed, they're not in their thinking brain, and it's going to be harder for them to zip their zipper. So you can go in and zip their zipper themselves for them, right? And do it for them in that moment.
But don't preempt.
Yeah, exactly. Like let them like, hey, okay, can you zip my zipper for me? I guess sometimes I might say sure without even making them try it themselves, depending on how they seem to me. Like if they see, like sometimes kids will ask us to do things for them that they can do themselves because they are looking for nurturing. So if you think that it's a time where like he doesn't know how to do it, let me teach him and encourage him to do it himself, help him, guide him, great. But if you know he knows how to do it and you think, okay, maybe he just wants a little bit of extra love and extra nurturing, go ahead and do it himself, or go ahead and do it for him. But I would never say like force a child to zip their own zipper because you're trying to teach them a lesson. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
This is such an art, not a science, right? Like there's never like one answer, like, yes, he should do the zipper himself all the time, or no, you should always do the zipper for him. There's so many things that come into play of like, how's his mood? Are you feeling connected? Do you think he's just wanting to be babied? Because being babied is really important. Like it's really like kids still need a lot of babying sometimes just because that's how they feel loved.
Yeah. And I do try and tune into that. Like, I'm really lucky. I only work 2 days a week. So I do get a lot of quality time with Stanley and Margot. And I do try and tune into their moods, the amount of sleep they've had, whether they've had a drink, whether they're hungry. I do try and tune into that because it helps me preempt maybe some of their behaviour more with Stanley because he's more explosive than with Margot. But yeah, I wouldn't say I've got that nailed on, but I'm doing my best with that.
Well, you've only been a mom for 3 years, and you've only been a dad for 3 years. So you're still really new in that job description.
Yeah, definitely.
And and I would say if you're unsure, I would err on the side of nurturing.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, that's really, really good. It's really useful. You've definitely given us some good insights there.
Okay, good. Well, we will catch up with you again in 3 weeks or so and see how it went. Just trying to think if there's any last thoughts that I want to leave you with. Just to remember that your kids are really, really little still. Like, really, they're like practically babies still. And there's a long way to go in terms of teaching skills and independence. And we really don't have to push kids towards independence. They have such a strong natural drive for independence that really the independence comes out of the nurturing and connection.
Yeah. No, and I do get that. I think we've got really different characters as well. That's becoming quite obvious. Like, Margot is ridiculously independent, wants to do everything. And Stanley, he doesn't care how much she wants to do. It's not of interest to him. He wants you to do it for him.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very different. He has explosive meltdowns. He struggles with transitions. Margot, if I pretend to be a unicorn and spray her shoes, I can get her shoes on, no problem.
Yeah.
It's easy to move along through play and everything else. So I feel like it's interesting, but they're just so different that you've got to have like lots of different tools.
Totally.
Yeah.
I bet that Stanley wanting you to do stuff for him also has to do with his babyhood being cut a little short by you having another baby. So he's still, if he were an only child or if you had another child much later, he probably would have progressed more to where Margot is now in terms of like wanting to do everything herself.
Interesting.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that he's still like, this other baby came along, right? And sort of like kicked him into earlier independence. So he's still looking for some more of that nurturing and babying. You could even pretend he's, baby Stanley. I mean, you could do it with Margot also, but pretend he's baby Stanley and wrap him up in a blanket. And, when you were a baby, I used to sing you this song. And yeah,
we do that. And I must admit, he's definitely the one out of the two of them, Sarah, that really needs connection. Like, if my mood is off because I've got a lot on my mind and I know that affects our connection, I can tell him his behaviour almost immediately. Whereas if me and him are well connected, then I can tell his behaviour is just so different.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like temperamentally, he's just the more sensitive of the two.
100%. We definitely get that. We're comfortable with that, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that you're doing this and that you're so early in your journey, and it's been really nice to talk to you. And we'll
and thanks for all your insights.
Yeah, you're so welcome. We'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
Take care. Bye-bye, Sarah.
Bye-bye. Hello, Hayley. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Good. And we don't have James with us today, but you'll have to give his report for him.
No problem. I can do that.
Okay. So how have things been since the last time we talked? I think it was about a month ago.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, things are good. There's always new challenges with children. I'm coming to realise now that I'm in my 4th year of parenting. But yeah, things are good. I think one of the biggest tips that you gave us that we've really, really, really stuck to was helping them understand that some people are in bigger bodies.
Mm-hmm.
They were spending quite a lot of time saying that people were, and it was quite rude and intrusive and awkward for me.
Mm-hmm.
So we spent quite a lot of time talking about people being in bigger bodies, animals being in bigger bodies, people being smaller bodies. And I must admit, it's now become quite a theme, for family to say, oh, mummy, you're in a really small body, or daddy's in a big body. So that kind of public awkwardness has been removed. And I feel much better with that.
Good.
That was a really good tip.
Good. And what about I know last time we talked about their sort of behavior in public in terms of not wanting to play with other kids, and then also around Stanley's, let's just say, his blunt honesty with I remember he had corrected somebody on the train.
Yeah.
And I really tried to help you understand that's sort of the way it goes with kids this age, and talked about coaching. Have you run into any of those sorts of situations where it's been you've found a little bit more patience and understanding of why these things happen?
Yeah, I think you helped me more than I been able to impact the children at this stage. So you helping me understand why they do it, be feeling threatened and other things has really helped me. Because what I started doing, I was doing it with, oh, can you hear me all right?
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
I think, where I was modeling how I think they could talk to other children, I've probably become a little bit more confident around that. And I probably started addressing things a bit earlier than I was before, which is something you suggested I did. And only the other day, we were in a really small kind of imaginative play area where you got kind of like little hairdressers, cafes, and Stanley got this ambulance and Margot got this pram, and I could immediately see what was going to happen because there was other children there. So I kind of started talking about it before we got in there. It's a space where we have to share. We're not at home. Children might approach you and want to play with things. And what could we do? What could we do to be kind? So we started talking about it in the car, which I thought really helped. And then when we were in there, I'm not going to say that they behaved perfectly because they didn't, but I felt I was much more controlled around that, and my understanding is much better.
Good. And when you first started off, you said that I helped you more than you were able to help the children. And I have to say that's like 90% of it is your own confidence and knowing that this is normal behavior for small children. And really the only person that we can control is ourselves, right? And our reaction to the situations. And so much of parenting is about fine-tuning our own reactions and our own attitudes towards children's behavior.
Yeah, I think, and that's really fair actually, Sarah, because I think I was getting really embarrassed. And I'll be honest, it was making me feel quite drained because I'm constantly feeling as though I'm in a confrontational scenario, and it's really, really hard. And I feel judged by other parents, and I feel awkward towards the child that Stanley or Margot are being rude towards. So lots of different emotions were coming up for me. Whereas I think when I spent some time with you helped me understand they think things are going to be taken from them, and that's why they're reacting the way they are. They're happy in their play. So when I started looking at it from their perspective, it made me want to help them understand what it was going to be like for them. We are here to play and have a good time, but other children are around and this is what it means. And then in there, I've now started having this kind of mantra with them where, if Stanley will say to me, Mummy, I want that. Baby, go and ask that person if you can have a go when they finish their turn. And he's really started embracing that. We'll go in. He's still got the rude, I want a turn. He's still got that, but look, I can't have it always. At least he is trying and he's listening to me. And if the child, in many cases, Sarah, the child said, okay. And I said to him, did that feel good? Was that nice? And he said, yeah, that was good. Off he's gone, But again, I've listened to some of the things you say, and you can say things to them. They don't seem to be listening, but it is going in. So I'm kind of sticking with it.
Good. Another thing that you said, a huge part of parenting, is that you're trying really hard to see things from their perspective, which is huge, right? Like that allows you to be like more empathetic. And I mean, that's what empathy is seeing it from their perspective. And when you feel like you understand why the behavior is happening, it makes you a lot more compassionate and patient for it. And when you're compassionate and patient, then you can actually do the coaching and the modeling and the teaching that you want to. And then over time, they're going to learn that from you.
Yeah. And I've looked out for that as well. Like there's certain words I say or certain phrases I say that the kids will say.
Mm-hmm.
So I've started to really understand that I do have quite an impact on them. The language I use
100%.
is the language they use. Yes.
For better or worse.
Yeah, for better or worse. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the final things we talked about was, sort of wondering about doing things for kids, and that you had been, wondering about if you could do too much for Stanley, especially, we talked about him being so little when Margot was born, and that he still wanted some babying. Has that shifted at all for you? I think I gave you a permission slip, and James too, to be able to do those things for him.
Yeah, I think so. I suppose James and I come from a slightly different place on this, like, and maybe that is just because we look at Stanley through slightly different lenses. Like, I do recognise, Sarah, that Stanley does struggle. Like, there's a separation anxiety that goes on there. He won't sleep alone throughout the night. I have to go in. I have to put my hand on his face. He won't go into nursery without them literally peeling him off me. So I think I probably do more for him because of that. And I'm not saying James doesn't acknowledge that. I just don't think that wears him down as much as it does me.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes don't want to stop doing things for him because he sometimes has meltdowns if he struggles with things. So I'm kind of preventing that.
Mm-hmm.
But after speaking to you, I've kind of stopped thinking he's always going to react badly. And I've just tried a little bit, and I've sort of said to him when he's wanting to play with me and he's said, "Oh, Mummy, can you be a dinosaur?" Or, I said, "Okay, mate, that's fine, but which dinosaur would you like me to be? And what noise would you like the dinosaur to make?" Because I want him to kind of come up with the answers a bit more than I've done before, whereas normally I just make the decisions for him.
Uh-huh.
And if he's been, threading something, I've kind of tried to show him how to do it and then say, "Can you have a go? Can you do that?"
Nice.
Whereas before, I would have just put it down on the floor and left it there. I wouldn't have encouraged him to have a go. So I have got a little bit better at that, and I've started to embrace the fact that he is 4 now, and he wants to be independent. I can see it, but then I've got this other side to me where I kind of, maybe I just need to do that. Maybe I just need to do this because I don't want him to get really upset or sad or, And yeah, I just need to let things be a little bit, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think nobody can learn anything when they're upset. So, if I think it's finding the balance between encouraging him to try, but also when he does get upset, stepping in and helping him if he needs help with something. Because when we get upset, our thinking brain goes offline. So if we're trying to learn a new skill or do something that's really difficult and we're really upset, then we're not going to be able to do it anyways. So, and you might think about like, well, how can I, scaffold him, right? Like, how can I figure out, like, I'll start it, you finish it. I don't know exactly what kind of things that we're talking about here. I think we're talking about like zippers last time. Like, I'll start it, you pull it up, or, I'll help you put the little thing in and then you pull the top up. So yeah, I guess there is that balance between we don't want to always be jumping in and rescuing our children because we want them to, to have that resilience and feel that confidence afterwards where they've struggled a little bit and they can do it. But also we don't want to stand back and let them suffer.
Yeah. And I struggle with the balance, Sarah. I think my lines are quite blurred on it, and you help me want to do better. I'm not quite there where I am. I think it's very natural for me I'm so used to Stanley needing me that I just default to that position. I just do. And I can see now in the last 2-3 months that we went to a trampoline park the other day and he just went to play. And he's never done that, ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, I'm lost. What do I do? Do I get a coffee? Do I sit down? I didn't know what to do because I'm so having to be involved in the play and being around him so much that was really new to me. So I am recognizing he wants to be more independent, and I just need to work out how I fit into that a little bit more and grow into a small adult as opposed to, the little boy that I was still born trick-or-treating like.
Right. But he is still only just barely 4. Like, I think he was 3 the last time we talked, which is still really, really little. So it does sound like there may be, there's a tendency a little bit for him to be a little bit anxious, a little bit cautious, and for you as well. So now, when he's only 4, now would be the perfect time to read up on some tools that you can use to help him with anxiety and to help yourself with anxiety. And I would highly recommend the book Anxious Kids, Anxious Parents by Lynn Lyons. It's a wonderful parenting book all about parenting for the opposite of anxiety and it will let you see, like, I don't think you're probably doing anything now that's not age appropriate for a 4-year-old, but it might help you avoid traps to get into as he's getting older, right?
Okay,
like avoid traps to get into in terms of like accommodating the anxiety versus giving him tools to talk back to his anxiety. So I think that would probably be a good step, just to like arm yourself, right, with some of that knowledge. So I would definitely try to do that. And I also think though that to remember he is still really little, and don't push him out of that little guy spot before he's ready. So I think I recognize, is this out of your own? I think the key here for you will be like, am I doing this because I'm anxious, or am I doing this because he needs more support and nurturing?
Yeah, I think I'm sometimes scared of his reaction. So I do things for him to prevent him from having a meltdown and getting frustrated. But I've actually really tried to work on myself in terms of accepting that it's okay that he cries. It's okay that he has a meltdown. That's all right. Because I think I found his crying and his meltdowns quite triggering. And I'd go into like, high alert, what do I do? I need to solve his problems. And I'm really, really working hard on just letting him be that way. I'm there for you, mate. I know it's tricky. I'm here for you. I'm not saying anything at all. I'm trying to address the situation and look at what he needs a bit more than I've ever done in the past.
Good.
And I think that will lead me in the right direction. Hopefully.
Yeah. So welcoming his feelings whenever you can. And I also have to say that if you don't have the bandwidth and you're like really low on resources and you can't handle a meltdown, it's fine to just do something to avoid a meltdown. Like, as long as you're not doing that all the time. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect. And like every single time, okay, I'm going to welcome his feelings when I know I could do this to avoid the meltdown. It's okay to have a little bit of flexibility.
Yeah. I do try, and I'm just becoming more comfortable with the fact that he is going to do that. And I'm not going to avoid asking you to try and do something because I think he might have a meltdown. I feel that I've gone into that, safety zone where I'm avoiding it, because obviously I've got Margot as well. She's only 15 months younger. So a lot of the time, Sarah, if he has one, she has one. So, you kind of doubled up with it then. So I think sometimes you go into a bit of safety mode, and I'm trying to just pull myself out of that little bit just so that I can try and help him experience new things and try things. Because, I do. What James was getting at in the last call. I am very quick to do everything for him. He doesn't even need to finish his sentence. I'm there.
Yeah, I think just watch that. What's the reason behind the help? Is it because you recognize that he needs nurturing, or are you trying to avoid your own anxious feelings? I think that would be a good key. Yeah.
That my own anxious feelings through the meltdown.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to avoid. And I'm trying to really work hard on not thinking like that and welcoming his feelings.
Good.
But yeah, I did. You helped us uncover that, because I think James has said that to me in the past, but when he said it to you, it wasn't directed at me.
Right, you could hear it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and giving us an update. And please continue to keep me posted and say hello to James.
I will. And thank you, Sarah. You've been an absolute godsend. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.